to a new AF chat with me, Ariel from App Figures, and I have Ian here with me, a returning guest, which I'm really, really excited about because last time when Ian was on the show, I said, will you come back? And Ian said yes, and I said, I'm going to hold you to that. And Ian's back, and I'm really happy about that because we have a really exciting topic, and that's A/B testing, but seasonality and A/B testing for seasonality. And seasonality is such a good way to increase downloads, and we're getting into probably one of the bigger seasonality times in the store. So this is just perfect. So Ian, thank you for joining us again, and introduce yourself to the folks who don't know you yet.
I work. My name's Ian Irving. I work at the BBC in the Children's and Education Department. I'm a data analyst that specializes in ASO and SEO. We've got our portfolio, which is the four children's apps. That portfolio is probably the biggest has the biggest reach in under fives in the UK. We generally reach on a weekly basis between 15 and 25% of under fives. So it's pretty large number of users that we're servicing every week.
All the kids, basically.
Yeah. We do think that there's probably, as they cycle through, we get it's in total over time, it's more than 25%. There is a small holdout that just flat out refuses to use us, though, seemingly.
No technology.
Yeah, exactly.
Until you get just above 5, and then you can't count them anymore. So they're like, yes.
Yeah. Well, that's when we call I tend to call like 5 the Spider-Man line, because then they discover brands, and CBBS is just no longer cool enough. So. And that is lowered if they have an older sibling in the house, because they will get bullied for enjoying our content. So it seems. So
interesting. I kind of now want to talk about how we fix this, but that's for a different day, for a different webinar. Today we want to talk about seasonality and leveraging seasonality for getting more downloads, and then using A/B testing to make sure that when you do it, it's actually the best. And this kind of came from a little blurb from our last AF chat, where you mentioned that you optimize for seasonality, and specifically we were talking about Halloween, and you came across this one little learning that if you didn't end the seasonal assets right on time, downloads actually went in a negative direction, or the conversion went down, and that kind of sparked all these thoughts and ideas. And really the topic for this. So maybe if we back out a little bit, if you can tell us a little bit more about how did you even get to think about, if I change my screenshot for Halloween, what's going to happen? What was that mindset like?
Well, we'd always, the apps, especially Playtime Island, which is like our biggest games app, because it's a collection of different games based on characters that they may have seen on TV or whatever. That's the single largest one, and the proposition is very simple. It's like games safe games that your child will enjoy, with no like dark patterns, no addicting coin purchases or anything like that.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest events of the year is a Christmas. So we'd always do like a Christmas game in app, and then we'd also change the icon. And even before I arrived, this was being done. And so that's what really started me to wonder, like, what actually is the impact of, this big seasonal push we do on that one app at that particular time. Because the impact of that is undeniable. That's often described as like our biggest event of the year, because we not only drop that at Christmas, when it's dark and people are on their devices more, but it's also when loads and loads of new devices, especially Android devices, lower end Android devices that end up in stockings, come online. So that was really the key that started me thinking about, well, we've got this one seasonal event, like, can we in any way quantify the impact of that, and what might be the effect of doing other seasonal, linking up other seasonal the other seasonal events in the calendar.
That makes a lot of sense. Christmas has always been kind of the big day because there's so many devices all over the place and they're all activating them. And if you kind of catch on, great. So taking that and scaling that outside of just Christmas, what have you done? We talked about Halloween, or we'll talk about Halloween being Halloween is it's just so easy to optimize for because it has kind of a theme that is universal or fairly universal at this point. But has this worked in other sort of seasons or seasonality or just different types of events?
Yeah. So I just want to make something clear about seasonality, because I think it can get a little confusing because, okay, so seasonality is usually, often when you first hear the word and you think about it, you sort of think of it as, oh, a date in the calendar, or oh, we're going to put a snowman in winter, we're going to put a autumn leaf in fall, we're going to put a bunny at springtime. And it's because it has the word season in it, it's often associated with those actual seasonal changes. But seasonality is actually best thought of where it's a time where something is happening offline, outside of your control, which is going to create an effect on your audience. And they're having an emotional reaction to that thing that's going on. And if you can be part of that or communicate that you understand that, that can often have a real impact. Now, it just so happens because our audience are children, we do literally put a pumpkin on it, because they're very much in that what you would consider seasonal mindset. So the first thing that we did was sort of identify. So this is when we were first doing it. We identified that the three biggest seasonal events that the children experience, judging with their school experience and everything else that goes on in the wider culture, is Easter, Halloween, and Christmas. So the first thing that we started to A/B test, were making changes to the app for Easter. So we decided we were going to put some mild seasonal elements on the background of the app, like in-app, but then also Easterify the listing and also change the icon.
Easterify. That's a verb now. Done.
So yeah, that was the of all the seasonal stuff that we did. That was the first one of these tests that we carried out, was this Easterification of the app.
So you went basically after the biggest possible events, I would say, because we're not going to call them seasons anymore, but events, and you said you used A/B testing to see if they would work. So during the actual event, instead of just replacing everything, you only replace it for a part of the group.
Yeah, so that's where the A/B testing came from, especially because the Christmas ones had already been tried, and it was there's a lot of stakeholders that you've got to communicate. Oh, it's worth investing the time in designing these assets and doing all this other stuff and taking the risk that you're going to change this. Is it actually going to work? So that's where we decided, we're going to A/B. We're going to, on the Google Play Store, we're going to A/B test these assets to find out what happens when you switch. And we ran the A/B tests in sort of like, so one of the things that I think is really useful that we learned early on is that Google Trends is a really, really excellent tool for broadly figuring out when the seasonal peak might be and how long the lead up to it is. So you find with Easter, for example, Easter's window, seasonal window, is quite short. It's like a sharp shock, and then it disappears again. So we were running tests in the weeks leading up to sort of to gauge, oh, well, if we run it 3 weeks before, what's the impact? If we run it 2 weeks before, what's the impact? If we run it 1 week before, what is the impact? And interestingly, that very much aligned with the Google Trends data to say, for Easter, really the key week to run it in is the week before Easter Sunday, because even though there's all this stuff going on, it's only then that people really are like, oh, it's Easter now. So yeah, and that's where we were using the A/B testing to determine, is this resulting in an increase in conversions and downloads?
Interesting. That makes so much sense because I always say that there's a huge difference between what happens on Google, the search engine, versus what happens in Google Play or in the App Store because of intent.
Yeah.
But for something that's seasonal or for an event that's happening outside the store, it ends up being kind of similar. If you look for, I imagine, the right keywords, maybe they won't necessarily align, but it's similar. And it's also, if you said emotions before. So it's not just about this holiday is happening, so everyone's just conditioned to like orange. It's more they feel like they want to see orange stuff because they see it outside, they see it at school, they see it wherever they go. They're conditioned to like candy, just like every other sugar eating person, regardless of size. So that makes sense. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wonder if we can turn that into a tool somehow, but that's for later.
Yeah, and we have found that the Google certainly for the larger seasonal events we were looking at, we have found that the Google Trends data is a pretty good indicator of when, how wide you want to set your seasonal window. So like, how long do I want to deploy these assets for? The other thing, as you mentioned, as you've alluded to earlier, the other thing that both the A/B test and the Google Trends data tells you is that just as important as starting seasonality is stopping it, because people are very, very sensitive. People are very, very you could say cruel in some ways. And if your seasonal assets are left up, I mean, in some of the tests we saw, if your seasonal assets are left up a day longer, like Easter Day happens, the next day, if your assets are still up, it will immediately start to negatively impact conversion. So starting it and getting that window right, where you have the potential to increase conversions, is just as important as cutting it off. And I'm sure that is the same. Like, if you had a sports app and you were doing it for the World Cup, the day that the final's over, nobody cares anymore.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Again, going back to that whole emotion, the idea of you wanting not logically to download this app because it has, I don't know, something colors from some game or orange theme and a little bunny. It's you don't want them logically, but it just happens. Like you're more attracted to it. So it makes sense that it would be the exact opposite. You're like, well, I'm done with this. Yeah. I'm done with this holiday. It's the time all the chocolate eggs become like 78% off in the stores, and that no one cares anymore. It's interesting. So reversing this question. So you said if you don't stop it in time, terrible things happen. So that's like, oh no, do not do this. Is there any negative impact if you start the A/B test or if you start the seasonal assets a lot before? Like, let's say I start them 6 weeks before.
Well, that's exactly what we saw with the Easter ones. Well, I would say the results that we saw with the Easter ones was the ones that we started really early. They either had no effect, like they did nothing, or they slightly negatively impacted conversion. Now, because we discovered that early on, we didn't do further A/B tests to sort of figure out,
yeah,
like, how bad can you make it? But I think that's something to be really, really careful of, which is why the Google Trends data is so useful, because you can get sort of you can really finely gauge it. Like, this is where it starts to rise. It's like we use a rule of thumb where it's sort of like 50% of the peak interest is probably a good time to start it.
Interesting. That makes a lot of sense. Again, I know there was some holidays like Christmas, you just wait for them to come. And I don't know how it is in England, but here in the US, it seems to be coming a little bit earlier every year.
Yeah.
So it used to be just, after Thanksgiving here. And now it's a little bit before and a little bit before. And you start hearing Christmas music now, probably around this time, which is kind of weird. But that could probably also align with the feeling, because if I'm not in Christmas mood, then Christmas assets won't really excite me at all.
Exactly. And I think Christmas is one of the more difficult ones, because there's that, there's like that Christmas wasteland after Christmas Day, but before New Year. And it's like, is it Christmas anymore? I'm not quite sure. But I think, again, you can use I think a lot of the, the huge the huge retail corporations have already done a lot of work for us, because you can see when they start and stop their seasonal promotions or whatever. And that is,
Yep.
I cannot imagine how much money has been invested in fine tuning exactly when to start and stop those. So I think you can take a lot of cues from what's just going on in the real world to inform your own seasonality. And as I say, because we're a children's app, ours is a very reflective of stereotypical seasonality. But if you've got a sports app, it's very clear when coverage starts and stops of different sports events. What's it called? Dating apps. You have Valentine's Day. That's an absolute key one. If you have a sort of a movie app or a TV app of some kind, it's very clear when new big movie releases are coming out, or new huge TV series are dropping. So usually, once you start to get a feel for your audience and the seasonality of your offering, I think it becomes quite easy and fluid to understand what you should be thinking about.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially if you have something to kind of attach to and say, well, if this is happening, then I should at least give it a try. Out of curiosity in the audience, how many of you have either done seasonal assets, whether it's the icon or screenshot, in any sort of form? Doesn't have to be amazing or testing or experimenting. If you did that, drop a thumbs up in the chat. I'm just curious. I have a sneaking suspicion that that number of thumbs up is going to be very small. Maybe one, maybe two. But I think one of the challenges with that is you hear the word A/B testing and you hear the word seasonality and you hear the word assets, and unless you know exactly what they mean, you'd be like, that's too complicated. That's not for me. But when you realize all you're doing is taking a pumpkin and bringing that into a screenshot and putting that into your product page.
There's one other really important thing I think to mention around this is that certainly you can A/B test all these assets and find out what your seasonality windows are, and that is the A/B testing is obviously very easy to do in the Google Play Store. Hopefully, it's going to be very easy to do in iOS 15 when it comes out. So it's very easy to create those variations, as you say. It can be as simple as just that's sometimes what's called like an elemental level of seasonality. So rather than what the other alternative is called takeover. So you just add some elemental seasonality. You put a pumpkin on it, you put a Santa hat on your character or whatever. You put some snow in the background. It's very light, rather than maybe say, oh, we've recloaked every single element of the store. We've created a custom game for this season or whatever. So it can be very simple to add those elemental, do some elemental A/B tests. But I think one of the other key things is if you change the icon for seasonal stuff, it will change on the person's phone. And that can be a real, we've certainly seen that, where it seems we get, this like unaccounted for bump in people who've been sort of inactive coming back due to the fact that they've seen the icon change. And because you just zone out to the the visual field that's presented to you when you look at your phone. But if one of those elements has changed, then there's a far higher chance that you're going to re-click on that and find out what's going on. So I think that's another one of the reasons why it can be quite powerful.
I think that makes a lot of sense. If, again, going back to that emotional level, if you see something that you don't recognize on your phone, you're going to click it. Interesting. All right. Well, if you don't change your icon and you're listening to this, you really have to change your icon very quickly. Like right now, go and change it. Find a season. Find an event that makes sense. One app that changes its icon all the time is Clubhouse, which I always found to be actually annoying, because I never understand what the icons do. It takes me a few seconds to realize this is a person and they're holding their hand up in this very specific way, just a different person every time. But I imagine that it gets me thinking. And I'm talking about it now.
You did notice it, though. You did notice it.
Exactly. So that is happening, and that is a thing. So that makes sense. But yeah, and that's another part of it. I think the changes also make sense. But going back to the question before about setting seasonal assets before their time, maybe, do you think that can create that can lower the conversion later on because maybe the same people who have seen it a few weeks ago will see it again and just not be as excited about it?
Yeah, definitely. I think audiences are getting more like more demanding and more hungry hungry for being like seen as current. So I think if you drop your seasonal assets too early, then yeah, they're just not going to be as interested as they would otherwise be, and
Yeah.
especially with the sorry, I'm just trying to remember what it's called. Yeah, the event cards coming in iOS.
The in-app events. Yeah.
Yeah, the in-app events. Sorry, I'm thinking of the Google. I find it really hard to remember exactly what the two different ones are called on the two different stores. I think that's going to become more important because it seems like they really want those to become, like one of the reasons why you go back to the store just to see what's going on is those cards. And it seems like seasonality is the perfect thing, because maybe you don't have the budget, maybe you don't have loads of stuff that you can do to have a reason to do one of those cards, and seasonality can be a good idea to generate those.
Yeah, I think that makes also a ton of sense. And I think I initially, when Apple introduced in-app events, I thought that would be a colossal waste of time and no one's going to use them. And we haven't seen them yet, so maybe that's going to end up being the case. But I'm starting to see how they could be useful because they tie into seasonality. And if you start thinking about seasonality as not specifically just an event that this app cares about, but maybe an event that this app also cares about, and you tie it to offline and you tie it to emotion, everything becomes a lot more clear. And you brought up iOS 15 and more features. And you did say you use Google currently to do this on the Google Play Store. iOS 15 is definitely going to be exciting once we eventually get it. Who knows when that's going to happen? It's anyone's guess at this point. But in addition to the optimization tools in iOS 15, Apple also introduced or announced at least custom product pages, which we started talking about before this. And custom product pages are pretty much everything you need, and maybe even more, for seasonal testing and for seasonality in general. And that gets you thinking, well, maybe you can address multiple different seasonalities or events if you have the ability to customize your page 35 times. How do you see that playing into what you're already doing with seasonality?
Well, I think, I mean, I really see it. It has the potential to be an absolutely huge game changer for lots and lots of different reasons, because you're no longer going to be constrained with this. I have one app store listing that needs to appeal to everybody. So I think it also means that for our different seasonal campaigns that we run with various influencers and across our social platforms, we can create custom pages and links for them that are going to go out across those campaigns, which means that emotional influence, that emotional impact that we have with the audience is going to be able to be so much bigger, because rather than having to work it into maybe the main listing, we will be able to do really fine-tuned custom ones, because that's one thing that it's probably a good time to talk about now. Is so me after we had the success with Easter, which we saw Easter, we saw a reasonable increase in conversion, and then we decided, right, we're going to absolutely double down on Halloween this year. It's the biggest. I mean, so this is last year. This is in 2020. So we're going to absolutely go full spooky. We're gonna we're gonna make the app as Halloweeny as possible. We're gonna do all the assets. So we decided to go the takeover route rather than the elemental route, and we did also just and there when we did that, what we found was that, especially around Halloween, that Halloween window, we got nearly double conversion rate.
Oh
So
wow.
that was absolutely beyond our wildest dreams. And interestingly, we didn't A/B test that because we were pretty the results of the results of the previous test showed us that we were pretty confident that that was going to be the effect, but we did end up with an inadvertent sort of A/B test. So Go Explore, which is our educational app, that has an icon which changes every season. So that was that's prior, before we started to do any of the seasonality stuff. It was just sort of like like a cute sort of joyful thing. Changing the seasons, we changed the app icon. And the autumn one just so happened to have a spider on it and have an orange background. And that meant Apple picked it to be in loads of these custom Halloween lists. So we got a huge increase in traffic from being in those lists. The same that we did for Playtime Island, which is our main children's app. But we only saw the doubling of conversion on Playtime Island, which had the whole spooky theme, whereas Go Explore had its standard listing. So even though they both benefited from being editorially selected due to the seasonal elements, only one of them saw the huge increase in conversion. So I think that really speaks to how obviously it also illustrates like adding seasonality to your app allows you the possibility of being able to compete to be selected for editorial placements, which are around that seasonal event. But it also really is important to stress the increase in conversion, because obviously that's a huge number of additional users we acquire.
Yeah, and it's not even only that, because you already had those people. They're just the ones who wouldn't convert just left. So you had the opportunity. You had them technically.
Yeah.
And they just left and not downloaded. It feels wasteful.
Yeah. Remind me of that opportunity cost. That's so painful. So painful to me. But so after that, the writing was really on the wall that the seasonality thing could be handy. And just coming back to what you were talking about earlier, and smaller, so those are obviously our three big ones throughout the year. So then we sort of started thinking, okay, we know we've got these three big ones. What are the potentials for the other smaller ones? So then we went through like a relatively, long and deep piece of research where we sort of found every single possible event that we could think of, and started, plugging that into Google Trends and figuring out where it was, compared to. So we were like, how many is St. Patrick's Day like a quarter of a Halloween, or is it an eighth of a Halloween? It's just playing all these ones across, just checking all these different ones. So I think we checked about 200 in total, trying to find out which ones we were. And then we sort of put them into a tiering system, because it became very clear that, the three big ones were sort of like there on their own. Then there was sort of like a second layer, which was stuff like Valentine's Day and Valentine's Day. What were some of the other ones? Valentine's Day.
For kids, Valentine's Day still has an impact.
Yeah, well, in England, in the UK, kids often write Valentine's cards to their mums, and some schools have like a little post box where they post the Valentine's cards to their mums and stuff. So they do know about it. We haven't decided to implement any Valentine's Day seasonality into our children's apps. I think you can understand why.
Yeah.
But in terms of classification, that was really, really handy. And then that sort of allowed us to be like, so talking about this elemental versus takeover idea, that allowed us to be like, okay, for tier ones, we're going to do full takeovers for certain apps, depending on which one we want to promote at that time. And then for like tier fours, which is smaller events, that's where maybe we'll just send a notification pointing to a piece of content which is kind of related to that. So like for World Elephant Day, we may in Go Explore or one of our reading apps, we may have a story that has an elephant in it. So it would just say, for this World Elephant Day, why not check out this? So I think that's another really good way where you can very sort of finely tune and decide, what am I going to do for these different levels of seasonality. There are some which probably it's like, if we get that right, it's going to be huge. But then there are other ones where it's like, I've got a gap in my marketing calendar. I can maybe use one of these smaller events to sort of like leverage it and try and get something extra out of it.
And I think that's a great point because, again, going back to the A/B testing and assets and thinking this is all complicated and it's going to take me and a team of others, unknown others, countless time. And that's what we've seen before when we talk about A/B testing. It's always, I don't know if I have time for this. I don't know when to start. And I see this even when I speak to developers about ASO, just ASO, high level. Like, I don't have time to try new keywords. I don't have time to research these things. And the real truth is, if you do a little bit, you can get something out of it. Maybe it's not going to be like ideal doubling of conversion, but would a 3% increase be exciting? I know it would be to me. So that makes a lot of sense that you don't have to put in the same amount of effort for every different type or every different event that you are considering.
And as you say, even if you identify, maybe if you identify, the one big one you're going to have this year, if you've only got limited resource, then you can probably get something pretty good out of it if you just do a little something for that one big one. And I think, if I had limited resource, I would be like, I am sure there is, one thing that is going to happen this year, which I want to somehow, communicate or signal with my app that I'm involved with.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it. Identify that one big thing. And you can even be wrong about what that one big thing is, because even if you go for the one medium thing accidentally and you miss the one big thing, that can still have a bump, and everything hopefully contributes to just growth, especially these days where everything or more apps are leaning more towards subscriptions. And you can see this a lot with the streaming, all the streaming apps, at least here in the US. There's this race and they're trying to find all the possible bumps they can get, because once they get you on board and you're paying them their $7 or $11 a month, they're going to get it again and again and again and again. And then they need to consider the next bump. And that's more people. That's not replacing. So that's, yeah.
And I also think, generally speaking, with seasonality, with a lot of these things, especially for sports, once you've identified those, you're not going to have to do it again. You've got, and especially if you identify them, you A/B test them to figure out, okay, does this have an impact or not? Because, I'll be honest, you read a lot of industry studies. Sometimes it works fantastically, in our example for Halloween. Sometimes it does nothing. And that's one of the reasons why it's really important. And as you correctly point out, sometimes it can have maybe a negative impact. And you've also got the opportunity cost that, maybe if you'd gone full in on it, like, you've gone a full takeover event of your entire listing and it does nothing, then that's where starting off with small elemental testing and seeing, does this move the dial at all, can really signal to you like, I want to invest more into that. So yeah, the other thing I think, coming back to your point about the your monetization and the subscription services, I saw one really interesting article I was reading where, for DLC and monetization, they were talking about, selling skins. Mm-hmm. And they were saying, like, seasonal skins were often absolutely massive sellers. And I just thought that was really, really a really interesting way of doing it. And they were often, they were talking about how, so for St. Patrick's Day, they have shamrock ones. For Valentine's Day, they have heart themed ones. And it was like this micro seasonality, like everything you could imagine. They had a different sort of DLC monetizable asset that they could sell you that day. And that really just, I was like, that's it taken to a really fine degree.
That's really next level. And if you think about consumable content, that makes perfect sense. If you think about it from a slightly different perspective of just keeping people engaged, offering the sort of content in app, just like changing the icon could either reignite or maintain the sort of engagement or excitement about an app. So it's not even about getting them to download the app. It's about getting them to continue using the app. And we did an AF chat about retention a few months ago, where retention should be one of the most important things after you get someone into the app, because You got them to download it, but not to activate. They're not going to do it. They're not, whether your app is for branding or for generating money with subscriptions or ads or anything else, you kind of need them to use it. And so that makes seasonality now creeps into now getting them to use it, which makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and I think just coming back to that point about it being a freshness indicator, and that is not only a freshness indicator to your audience, it's also a freshness indicator to the stores. Because as I was saying, as I mentioned previously, us doing all that Halloween stuff meant that we were able to enter into those seasonal lists. And I've certainly seen it where apps you might not expect to get into those lists, because Apple, both Apple especially seems to sometimes promote some, quite relatively niche things in some of its custom lists or in its editorial features. They'll pick someone out of obscurity and just pop them in one of those lists because it happened to align with what they wanted to promote that day. Mm-hmm. So I think buying a ticket to be in that lottery is a really good idea.
That makes a lot of sense. And everyone asks me, how do I get featured on the App Store? Can I just pay someone? And the answer is never yes. And it's all about how do you make Apple notice you?
Yeah.
And that's yet another way. So one of the biggest ways to get Apple to notice you is use their tech, right? So they introduced AR. They introduced AR a few years ago, and pretty much everyone who touched AR got featured at some point. Mm-hmm. They introduced all these different additions that are supposed to make the life of end users, of customers, really easy. And you are in this lottery, like you called it. But then the same thing with seasonality, because people have this emotional connection. So you do this, and Apple ultimately just wants to put you in front of customers because you know what you're doing, and they like that. And everyone wins in this case. So that is such a good point. I have a guide on how to get featured on the App Store. I think I'm going to add this if it's not there already. Seasonal updates for your assets, which makes a ton of sense.
Because again, you see, again, we were talking about the major retailers. I'm sure Apple know exactly what they want to promote and when and what the seasonal windows are, and I've no doubt that some of the that is definitely an important strand of their editorial calendar, and so.
Absolutely. There are two questions from Natalia in the Q&A. By the way, if you have a question, drop it in the Q&A. It's a button on the bottom of your screen, and then we can see it and respond to it. And the questions have to do with how do you know what's going on iOS, and also how often do you recommend updating ASO? So I can take the ASO question very easily. I usually say 3 to 4 weeks, kind of across the board. It's a little bit faster on Apple. It's a little bit slower on Google, but that's kind of the high-level answer. But I would say just try it a few times, and you will know what's happening, and you will see the changes. We do all the tracking every hour, so you'll see the changes immediately, really, as Apple makes them, as the algorithm picks it up. So that's what I would say. How would you?
We have definitely seen it where, through. Well, I want to say no fault of our own, but we've definitely had it where I think at one point we didn't update an app for about 3 months. Just due to various constraints or whatever. And after that point, it literally started to fall off a cliff. So there is definitely some kind of, the stores are looking for indicators of freshness. The stores are looking at how often are you updated this. I was just watching a seminar earlier today, and they were saying the average app updates, between 50 to 30 times a year. So I think if your competition are constantly, flagging that up to the App Store, being like, hey, I'm doing something new. Hey, I'm keeping this fresh. Hey, I'm fixing the problems that my users have had. You've got, that's one thing that I'm always very aware of, is that, you're not only dealing with the app stores, it's all these other people that you're running against. And so, if that's what they're doing, it's sort of like a minimal floor where you have to be performing at to sort of be able to compete in the market.
The one other thing that not enough people I think know about is that Apple, for the rank algorithm for keyword ranks, they're not necessarily looking at specific numbers. They're looking at trends, and they're looking at averages over time. And so the change in how many new ratings you have could be a significant differentiator, even if you have a much fewer ratings versus a much bigger app that has a ton of ratings, but they don't really change all that often. And it's the same with number of updates. If you keep your app fresh, a competitor can have 10 times the downloads and you can still beat them and be number one. And you can see that across a bunch of different keywords, even the very popular ones, which is not something I even expected when I started. So I've been doing keyword teardowns for the last few weeks and sharing them every week. And I'm starting to see all these trends and I'm writing about them. And you can definitely see that it's not as straightforward as I have more downloads, so I'm going to be number one. That's kind of the last thing that is true about this.
We have definitely seen correlations between like review velocity, like the rate at which you are acquiring reviews, and like pretty fine movements in our rankings for different things. And I always find that amazing because once we for Android, once we enabled, you know, the new well, it was new, the Google Play Store review prompt, you know, the in-app one that was similar to Apple. Once we implemented that for some of the apps, which had, you know, like had been languishing because they were unable to get the volume of reviews acquired. Once we put that in, due to the size of our user base, like it just absolutely transformed performance. Like it literally blew my mind. It was one of the most impactful things that we've ever done. So I think that's really, and I presume that was because of, you know, just because we'd had this huge audience which had never even thought to review it, but presented with it in app without having to, you know, do too much to leave us a rating. Suddenly we got this flood of new reviews, and the rate at which they were coming in just absolutely skyrocketed us. So yeah, definitely.
I actually published an article today about the most important signal for ASO ranks, for keyword ranks, and it is ratings. And you can see it, and I have multiple examples that show you exactly why apps that have much fewer downloads can still rank better than apps that have way more downloads, which is crazy.
But Playtime Island, which is our, you know, like flagship app, like it's huge, and you know it gets loads and loads of downloads. But prior in 2019, its review score was only like 3.6 or something. You know, it was in the mid threes. Occasionally it got up to 3.7, but it was stuck there. And it basically, you know, in its category rankings were very low. You know, even though it had a huge number of downloads, huge number of like good reviews, even though the average review score was low, it was only once the review score started to move up that it moved into sort of the category ranking positions that you would, you know, that you would assume an app that big would be at, because previously it was just like in the doghouse. So yeah, I would, you know, all our own experience points to that being absolutely the case. And definitely just from a conversion perspective, moving over 4 stars, we see a huge, you know, that literally produces a noticeable like on-off, almost like an on-off thing in conversion rate. Like, because I think if it's below 4 stars, people think it's broken.
Yep. It just doesn't feel right when it's when you don't have a 4 point something, and the something becomes arbitrary at this point from what I've seen. And I think the algorithm feels the exact same way about it, and that ultimately gets you fewer downloads, fewer ratings, and worse results. Yeah. Which also makes sense if you're trying to use this as a signal to know if people care about this app. 3, they're indifferent. You know, a 1, they hate it. A 2, they dislike it. But all of those are negative. As a follow-up question or as an additional question, Natalia asked if you know of any benchmarks for children's gaming apps on iOS. And one easy one that I have is our mobile download index, which has the kids categories now and all the countries, or most of the countries. And we do that for revenue and also for downloads. So you can get an idea of what downloads look like in the category over time, either by day or over a long period of time. And that's something that a lot of people were using when COVID just happened, and some categories just all the way up as far as downloads, and some categories all the way down as far as downloads, to know if it's just their app, if it's everyone, if that's where the industry is heading. And you can see a lot of those categories now are slowly starting to come back up, and those that were spiking are slowly starting to come down. And I know you use the index. Do you use it in a similar fashion?
Yeah. So the I use the index every week. The broadest higher level one, just purely to say to stakeholders, like, this is what's happening
Yep.
across the industry at the moment. You may, looking at our year-on-year results, you may think this, but when you take the market index into account, we're actually doing really well.
Yep.
And that's that, and especially with some of the some of the smaller subcategories that our apps operate in, it's really, really invaluable, because you can say, look, things are going great in this segment at the moment, or they're not going so well.
Yep.
We are also fortunate in terms of the question was talking about comparing like conversion rates and against other competitors. We're fortunate in that we've got 4 apps which are all in similar but not identical, have similar but not identical propositions. So we often, it's very easy to compare the conversion rates across those. We're quite fortunate in that. In that case, I would also say that the other thing, we do just compare against the standard industry conversion rates, like in across the different sort of categories that our apps sit in.
That makes sense, to kind of have direct visibility, I would say, or not direct, but have visibility into everything. The other thing that I know a lot of companies do is they create their own benchmark. So in addition to using the index, which is a category benchmark, and in some case, the categories are so specific, especially in the kids categories, that the apps are interchangeable enough. But then you have some other categories like utilities, where there's this wide array of utilities. And if your app is for faxing and someone else's app is for scanning, even though they seem very similar, they don't exactly align. And for that, what I would do is actually create my own benchmark by finding apps that are doing very well in those categories, put them into my competitors report, and then see exactly how they're doing. And then you can take the min, the max, and you can see the range, and you can see what ads they're running. So you can see exactly what's happening. And the one thing I enjoy seeing is if they're running new ads, and then you can learn from those new creatives, especially when it comes to seasonality, because they're going to start running their ads just a little bit before, like you were saying, and you can start understanding what they're trying to do.
That's so for each one of our 4 apps, we have a like a broad basket of so this is using the competitors tool. We've got a broad basket of apps, taken, which are considered to be like the top ones in our children's space, as sort of like an additional market trend indicator. So it's very, very easy for us to see, like, are we moving with or against the general trend that is affecting all those same apps at the moment. Then we also have more specific, like closer competitors for each one of the apps, to see if there's any like sub trends that are occurring within that more precise group. And I would say that is really, really useful, because you can definitely see when campaigns are turned on and off. And they do often align like bang on with seasonal, like, so, especially with the Christmas times and sometimes the October half term. You can literally see like, oh, everyone's turned theirs on, oh, it's been turned off again. And again, I think talking about using other people's experience to, using money that other people have spent to figure things out, that can be really key, because if they're doing it, then you at least might want to A/B test a pumpkin.
Yep. I just gave a talk about basically learning from other people's budgets a few weeks ago at a conference, and that's really essentially it. If you can learn from them, you should also run your own tests and experiments and try your own ideas, but why start from scratch every time? That's always been my thinking. If I can learn off of someone else's mistakes or off of someone else's successes, I can easily improve and refine and run tests that are slightly better and get ahead.
Yeah, and I think if you're going from zero, then it's really, really good. And also the fact is, as I said before, like with these seasonal events, they're things that are emotional. These are things that are emotionally happening to your audience. It is part of the world that they are currently lived in, and that means they're subconsciously primed by all this stuff that's going on around them to be expecting that. And again, that I think the sports one is a really, really good example, because if you're a massive sports fan and the sports app doesn't some way comment on what the big story of the moment is, then you feel like, is this really for me? Because I'm really, everyone I'm talking to is talking about this thing, and then this app, which is supposedly selling me, is going to improve my experience of it. It's not talking about it. So I think if you're going from and that's really the point about coming from zero. Like, it's like the terrain of the market, and no matter what, there's going to be a mountain there. So you may as well figure out how best to climb it. Obviously, as you say, you want to be running your own, and that's a slightly different topic about figuring out which assets convert best. Which creatives are the ones that really deliver it. But the seasonality is something which I don't think for most apps, I don't think you can ignore. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I would say for most apps, yeah, it can be very, very. Some apps maybe not, but yeah.
I mean, ultimately, it makes sense because you have these two types of like ways to acquire knowledge. The way I see it is, one, can it be done, and two, can I do it? So if you know that someone else ran this one experiment, they put a pumpkin on the head of their main character and it worked great. But now, can I replicate this? And is my pumpkin going to be exactly the same, or is it going to be slightly different? Or is my character the kind that sits on a pumpkin as opposed to holds a pumpkin? And you have all these things. So if you can learn all the high level ideas from competitors, test them on your own, I think you saved half the work. That's the way I see it.
And just reflecting that, one of the things that we find most time consuming is like actually constructing hypotheses for A/B testing.
Yeah.
Because you especially if you decide right, I'm going to start A/B testing. There's, as with most creative things, you're like, oh well, I'm just going to quickly pull everything off the shelf that I was thinking about, and then once you've gone through those, you're like, oh, all those ideas that were floating around that have been floating for ages, I've done now.
Yeah.
So now I need to, get ideas from somewhere. So yeah.
Where do we go now? It's it's interesting because in the previous A/B testing, in part 2 of this, the guest also said that they, in one case with one of the consulting clients, they had to run 10 different ideas until the A/B test generated any results.
Yeah.
So you can think of one, you can probably think of 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, and then eventually you run out of ideas. And what do? You can go ask your friends, but you can also just see what competitors are doing. That's why when we introduced ad intelligence, it became very exciting. And I would just sit there and look at ads, and not for QAing or anything like that, also for that, but mostly because I was just curious. Why is this ad shorter than this competitor's ad? And if you, one of the areas that has so many ads is casino games, and they each do things that are very different, but they all also do things that are exactly identical. So you can see they're learning, I'm going to air quote this, but also at the same time trying their own things, which then the rest will learn. And
I also think, because we definitely had some negative or flat results, not just for our seasonality A/B test, but A/B test generally. And you were always like, great, well, that's one thing we don't have to care about anymore. And that is also the process of you refining down, like, okay, what really matters and what should I really focus on? Because we all have limited time, we all have limited resources, no matter how big or small our enterprise is. And I think A/B testing can really get you there much quicker than otherwise. Yeah, absolutely. In one of the AVE chats that we ran in the past, we had a guest by the name of Ben, and Ben basically said every test that you run, you learn from, because either you get a bump or you get something positive, or you know what not to touch again. And you know why, with certainty. It's not like, I don't want to do this because it doesn't make sense. So that, which is exactly what you said, which makes a lot of sense. I've always said to try things. The idea, this experimental mindset is, I think, what gets people to get more downloads and to find more things that they can do to see those bumps. Because if you just expect that silver bullet, it's not going to happen. Yeah, I also found it. I also really, once we started doing it, I really found it addictive. I just started to want to test everything, like even really tiny variations and stuff, because you're like, why not? We might find that we get 3% conversion increase by changing the font on that picture. You honestly never know. And the good thing is, like, as you say, for small changes, it can be really, really like cheap to do them. Yeah. And I've said this.
in pretty much every AF chat that we've done that had to do with A/B testing, but we A/B test our email subjects, and we have a system that does it automatically. And in the beginning, when we first started, it was a great idea, and we had all this excitement going into it. And then eventually, I was thinking, well, eventually we'll learn what's the right subject for every email. And the answer is no. You have a better idea, you have more intuition. But once I had the ability to try all the ideas that I had and automatically make sure the best one gets selected, I never want to send an email without A/B testing subject again. It doesn't make any sense to me. The effort is extremely minimal. I already have these ideas. Now I just get to make sure that what I'm doing actually has the best chances of actually succeeding. And I see the same thing with A/B testing on the App Store and on Google Play. You have all this traffic, like what we were saying before. It's this opportunity. They're already coming to your app. They're already looking at it, unless your conversion rate is 100%. And if it is, if anyone in the crowd here has 100% conversion rate.
Call me.
Yeah, exactly. We have to talk. And more than 3 downloads a year, because I can see that happening. And so everything you do is really to get those additional percentages, and A/B testing just makes sense. I'm really looking forward to seeing how Apple actually rolls it out when that happens. And I think that's going to change really how we have it. But Google's had it for a long time, and I've used it, and I really like it. So it's not an unknown. I think it's just a matter of we have to do it.
Yeah, and as I say, I really think seasonality is one of the perfect candidates if you want to start to explore something like something with A/B testing, where it can be quite easy to start. I think it's a really great thing to go for. And if you are in a sector where it is highly seasonal, there is stuff going on as the year goes on, it can really help. Like, not only in my experience, lots of people I've talked to have said those conversion rate increases are real and very, very powerful.
I've seen it. I've seen data behind it, so I believe you. Cool. And I think that brings us to the end. This was super informative. We talked about so many different things. I was actually taking notes in the middle, if you saw my eyes leaning down a little bit, because I want to be able to write a good article about this with all the things that we talked about. That's how good this was. So exciting. Hopefully we answered the questions that came up. We posted some links in the chat regarding the guides that I mentioned, and also some of the other links. If you have any questions about this, about anything related to App Store optimization, you can find me online. Almost everyone has my email at this point, but if not, it's I'll put it in the chat, and I'll also put my Twitter. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, Ian, do you do Twitter?
No, they can reach me on LinkedIn now. So.
LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Sounds good. We'll make sure your LinkedIn then is plastered all over the Twitter.
Yeah, I work for the BBC. I'm far too uncool to have a Twitter. So.
Well, LinkedIn is kind of cool, no?
Yeah. It's not as cool as Twitter, though. It's not as fast paced.
We'll go with it. It doesn't have super follows, so it can't be as cool. But we'll go with a maybe for now. In any case, thank you, Ian, for joining me and for sharing all this experience that you can only get by doing. And hopefully we answer all the questions. If anyone has any questions, I said that already. And we will actually have a 4th part to this A/B testing series where we'll get really into the numbers, deep into how to analyze an A/B test and understand the results. And that's coming in the future, so make sure you're on our mailing list to get that invitation. And on that happy note, I'm going to say happy Tuesday. Good evening to everyone, or good night to everyone who's going to sleep. And again, thank you for joining us, Ian. This was great.
No problem. Thanks for having me. See you later.
Alrighty.
Bye.
Bye-bye.